When last week, when Rich and I kept watching the news and the Facebook blogs and social media was exploding, we felt very, very convicted in our own hearts that we just couldn't come and do Sunday church as normal. That as a community of people that follow Jesus, our motivation to have a conversation around what does it really mean to follow Jesus in a time where the races are at war with one another. What does reconciliation work look like for us, for VCC? So we want to be about the things that Jesus taught us to do, and things that actually don't come naturally for us. For many of us, the work of reconciliation doesn't come natural. So we have to practice these things in order to allow God to shape us and guide us and empower us. So today we want to listen. There's a lot of injustice in our world, but today we want to posture our hearts, our minds, and practice listening to someone else's experience of what it means to be a Black man in America today. I met Arif through my friend Lars, who plays poker with me on Monday nights. And last Monday we talked about the poker pastor, and if you weren't here, there's a recording. You can go to the podcast on our website and listen to that conversation. And it was interesting because on Monday night, Lars is of mixed race, and we began to talk about what the things that were happening in Ferguson, and I asked him, what do you think about this? Like, you're mixed race, you're half African American, like how do you experience the news? Like what happens for you? So we ended up having a great conversation, and then I invited him to come and speak. And Lars said, you know what, I know somebody that would be way better than me to speak about this. So let me introduce you to Arif.
I know someone a lot more angry.
Yeah, that's what he said. He did. Way more angry. He goes, you should read his Facebook post. And I said, so I looked you up and stalked your Facebook page, and then we met via Facebook, and that's Arif Gursel is here to talk with us today. So I want to just start with just asking you, can you just tell us about yourself? Just give us some background, autobiographical.
Sure. I was born in Chicago, raised in New York City. I went to school in Tuskegee, Alabama, rural Alabama, and then moved to Seattle, Washington about 12 years ago. So I've been a Black man in every part of this country. and each has come with its own experiences, but also with the same kind of common trait.
How do you know Lars?
Lars and I went to high school together, so we ran track together in high school in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, New York, okay. So just tell us a little bit more about you. You were raised in Chicago. How old were you when you moved to Brooklyn?
Moved to Brooklyn when I was 4. My entire family was still in Chicago. My mom and I moved to New York after a divorce with my father. So I did the whole single mother, New York City kid thing, all the way to high school. From high school I went to school in Tuskegee, Alabama, studying architecture, and later switched to computer science. Got an internship with Microsoft in 99, 2000, and spent the last 12 years at Microsoft 2000 and 2012. Went back to Chicago to do my MBA in Chicago, University of Chicago. Came back after finishing that to Seattle, started a few technology companies here in the area, so I'm a serial entrepreneur. Do a lot on the startup side, which basically means I spend all my money trying to make more money. It's really weird. And now I'm at Zillow, doing some more technology work.
So I really just want to ask you, through your eyes, tell us what you're seeing in Ferguson. You get the mic.
My perspective of the whole situation is you are seeing the culmination of hundreds and hundreds of years compounded, exploding again. I was listening to a lot of the things that you said starting the service, and I think the one about not having an honest conversation. And when you have superficial conversations, they're just superficial fixes, and they're temporary. And I look at civil rights in the 60s was a temporary conversation. everyone likes to focus on conversations around effect, right? So I look at Mike Brown and Ferugson is just another conversation around effect. Trayvon Martin is just effect. Eric Garner in New York is just effect. Black on black violence is just effect. No one wants to have a conversation around cause. And it's really easy to look at these effect-based conversations, and then you allow the propaganda machine to take effect, and it's easy for people to take sides. And it's not a conversation about black rights, it's not a conversation about civil rights, it's a conversation about human rights. If you look at the most oppressed people in any society, whatever power establishment is in place, if they're willing to do it to the oppressed, they're willing to do it to all. And it's only a matter of time until that value chain continues to move downstream. It's quite simple. It's two things. It is, you're seeing the systematic oppression of the people over hundreds and hundreds of years starting to manifest itself in other ways. And so you're not dealing with white supremacy, and you're not dealing with slavery and the effects of it, and you're not dealing with systematic oppression. And until we have those conversations about Ferguson or Trayvon Martin or black on black violence or racism are for naught. So that's ultimately what I'm seeing.
Tell us a couple of stories where you have run head-on into racism in your own life. Tell us how you've experienced racism.
I don't even think I can tell you a story. My life is every day. It really is. It's not a, the person who can tell you a story hasn't lived it. Like, my life is the story of racism. I can tell you the first time I remember that color mattered. And I was, I tell people all the time, they say, oh, well, you went to school in Alabama, that must have been tough, right? And I said, no, I actually appreciated Alabama. Because in Alabama, you knew you were black and you knew where you stood, and it was very out in the open, even in the year 2000, right? It's like, no, you don't belong here, and you belong there, and it's a black part of town, and a white part of town, and everybody's thriving, right? It's when things are superficial and hidden and sly. And I remember being 8 years old, standing in a restaurant in New York with my stepfather at the time, hungry, and just standing there, and like no one serving us. And finally, after a while, my father was like, come on, let's go, we're gonna go to another restaurant. I'm fighting him, like, no, I'm hungry, I want a cheeseburger. And he says, well, let's go. I'm not spending my money here. And I'm fighting him about it. And he had to finally stop and say, look, you haven't noticed that 10 white people are walking here and got served, and we're still standing here. And it was the first time I kind of like, oh, yeah, that did just happen, right? Because racism is taught, and prejudice is taught, and it's one of those things, as a kid, you don't look out for it. You don't understand it until the first time you're exposed to it. Now, fast forward, from there, I've had my own run-ins with NYPD, where you're picked up, taken down to the bridge, beaten, left there. It's just...
Why? Tell us about that. Just
That's
drop
no why.
it. Yeah,
it's no why.
Not a why, but tell it. I would like you to just tell us that story. What were you doing? What was happening? Just draw us a picture of what it...
A couple of friends walking down the street, guy pulls up in a cab, sitting in the back of the cab. Pardon my language, what the F are you kids doing? You kind of look, and it's so funny, that's why when I hear the Ferguson story and the Mike Brown story, it's like, get out of the street. It's the same kind of like unprovoked engagement. My friends and I look like, who are you talking to? Of course we shout back, we're New York City kids, or you're just another guy on the street. Guy pops out, hey, you guys want to do something about it? We're looking at him like, okay. Pops out of the cab, 3 guys jump out of the cab, pull out badges, and they're NYPD detectives. And so detectives in New York City can also drive taxi cabs that are unmarked cars, and the computers are what you think are the meters, and they go around provoking people. And that was enough to get us arrested and never booked. It's kind of like police justice is what we call it. So, those stories happen, and it's not the basis of this conversation, but it is effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when I hear you tell a story like that of what's happened to you, I have a 16-year-old son that just recently got his driver's license, and I don't think Rich and I felt the need to sit down and explain to him how he should behave if he got pulled over. I mean, it really never entered my mind to have that conversation with Alexander. And so it sort of makes me think about when white people talk about having the talk with their kids, we most likely are talking about sex. Have you had the talk? Yeah, Rich had a talk with him, you know, or whatever. Sorry, Alex, I'm so sorry. I really am. But we have an African-American son-in-law, and I was talking with him this week, and no, when I say, have you had the talk with your kids, especially the two boys, what does that mean to you? And he goes, how to behave if they have encounters with authorities. Like, we've had that talk of what it means to be respectful of authority. So I just think it's something that we don't live with. Like, we don't even think about it, which is part of the reason why I think this conversation is important, because there are so many ways in which we are predominantly not people of color sitting in this room and need to learn from you. What are ways in which we don't even see what's going on? How can you help us?
I don't think I can until, you know, it's one of those things that people, you have to walk a path in which you decide to see the world from someone else's perspective. I love to debate personally.
Yeah.
And I always feel that what makes anyone really good at debate is being able to remove themselves from any side of the argument, right? And so the reason I'm so good at debate is because I can debate something that I love, and I can take the opposing side, because I can step out of myself and see it from the other perspective.
I can see a series coming now. We can have a debate club.
Sure. And I think in order to be serious about this conversation, you have to do that. You really have to be able to say, okay, I understand my place of privilege in this society, now let me remove that for a second and say, wow, what would it feel like if every store I went into, someone followed me? Like every single store, like every day, like every store. What would it feel like if I walked across the street or came out of my car and every time a woman saw me, she grabbed her purse? Like every time. And when I get on the elevator, it's like, oh my God, like every single time. All right, and so until you understand that and you start to live with it, and then when you don't understand, like, you know, being from Chicago, I have a lot of family in Chicago, and it's really a bad situation that was happening with young black men in Chicago specifically. And you heard that as also part of the propaganda machine as a response to Ferguson. Well, 28 black men were shot in Chicago yesterday, no one's marching about that. You're right, and they should be.
Yeah.
But the conversation again would be about cause and not effect. And when I look at my little cousins in Chicago, it's the same thing. Like, how do I keep them alive? Like, I just shipped one of my little cousins in Chicago off to college this past weekend. I just came back from Chicago. I'm proud that he's not dead. Right? Like, to have to think, like, 3 of them are still alive out of 100%, I'm doing good as an uncle, right? It's a sad thing. And so until you can have that conversation, you can remove yourself, it's just really hard. And, you know, you and I were talking earlier, you know, I see a 17-year-old unarmed man who was shot in the street. There's two sides of the story, right? We're going to hear the cop side, we'll hear some witness side, and then there's the absolute truth that probably none of us will ever get to. The really important thing is not what happened there. The thing that people should look at, and what had me so riled up on Facebook, and probably what Laura said, talk to him, this guy, is after this young man was murdered, I watched him go on trial for his own murder. Do you guys hear that? Like, he went on trial for his own murder, okay? So the first thing they want to tell you is, well, he had marijuana in his system. Let's defame him. Let's make him some kind of thug. And I guarantee you right now, if we go drug test, 90% of the CEOs in this city, they all got marijuana in their system, okay? Well, he just stole something from a convenience store, a handful of cigars. Last time I checked, they were about $1 a piece, so let's say he got a whole bundle in his hand, maybe 10 bucks. If any of you in there has ever used a computer and ever used any software that you didn't pay for, I guarantee you just stole more than that. So if you listen to the propaganda engine, and if you're a conscious black man, you sit there and you hear a young man